Gina Trapani.
Thank you. Somebody yesterday gave me some good advice. They said that I should open with a joke. And I'm opening with 9/11. So this is going to be good, you guys. So I'm here today to tell you 3 stories from my life. Nothing fancy, no big deal, just 3 stories. And the first story, there they are, is about hindsight. So in 2001, I was living in New York City, and I was working at my first .com job at a site that is no longer around. And the offices of this company were on the Lower West Side of Manhattan. And so that's where I was the morning of September 11th. I was standing on Spring Street and Hudson Street, surrounded by my coworkers. And this is a photo kind of not far from where we were standing. And we were standing kind of far enough away that the ash, wasn't falling like on us, but we were close enough that the people who were walking away from the site were passing us. They were walking north. So it was all these people in their like suits and ties and carrying their high heels, and they were covered in ash, their hair and their shoulders, and they were just walking past us, just silently, not saying anything. And a former coworker of mine had just gotten a job at a company in the World Trade Center, and he shows up at the corner, and his hands are shaking because his alarm hadn't gone off that morning, and it saved his life. Later that day, I found out that my brother's childhood best friend died in Tower 2. So as someone in my mid-20s who had lived like a really good life, I had never experienced anything like that. Watching all those people die because they had gone to work that day. And in the following weeks and months and years, to cope with it, I became obsessed with time, how it's all running out on all of us. And not just that we're all gonna die someday, because we will. More that like every day some version of ourselves dies, right? Like something transformative happens and then you're not the same person anymore. Just like that. It's kind of instantaneous. Right after 9/11, I found it extremely difficult to remember what it was like to feel safe in my own city where I'd been born and raised. So to deal with that loss of an earlier version of me, I became obsessed with documenting everything. I just started voraciously documenting everything in my life, writing down the most mundane and inane things, taking photos of my coffee cups and my garbage cans, because it all just might go away at some point. And back then, this is when blogs were just starting to get big, and so I did it on a blog. I can barely look at this because it's so embarrassing, but this is a screenshot of my personal blog from a long time ago. A few years in, my fixation on time and losing it matured into a worry about wasting time. So, I worried that I was gonna die doing something really stupid, like, upgrading an operating system, or doing dishes, or, I don't know, going to the store to get milk because I forgot to pick up the milk when I was at the store the day before. And that's when this happened. This is a website that I started. It's called Lifehacker. It's a Gawker media blog I started back in 2004. And it's about life hacks, clever tricks to save you time. So Lifehacker is about kind of systematizing and shortcutting everything to help you run your life the most efficiently and productively that you possibly can. About everything from how you put butter your toast in the morning. You should use a cheese slicer, and you get this like really thin pat, and it melts evenly and kind of really fast. To like the keyboard shortcuts that help you process your Gmail inbox. Highly recommend the Y key, archive, and M. M is underrated, mute conversation. So Lifehacker was about living your most productive and most efficient life. And this is the part that wasn't in the tagline on the website. It was because someday you're gonna die. The site got really popular really fast, like beyond my wildest expectations. Million-page view days weren't uncommon, and back in 2006, 2007, 2008, that was crazy. It spawned books and awards and apps, and I got myself on TV and in newspapers and magazines, and a family friend heard me on the radio and called my mom and was like, what? And my mom called me, and she was like, This is because of your website? I love my mom. Unlike our sibling sites, Lifehacker's tone was a lot like XOXO. It was anti-snark, it was optimistic, it was friendly, it was helpful. And the work that my team and I did there was some of the best of my life. And looking back, it came about because I was scared out of my mind that I was running out of time. It's such a cliche, really, right? We hear this all the time. You have the hit pop songs that come about because of that awful breakup, the blockbuster film based on a tragedy. But sometimes it's just not that obvious, right? It takes a really, really, really long time to make the connection between your worst moments and your best work. So when I'm really deep in the muck, this is what I try to remember. Someday, somehow, your worst moments are going to feed your best work. My next story is about transitions. My writer friend, Michael Barish, published an essay on his website, which is no longer there, but it made such an impression on me, I wanted to paraphrase it here today. Hopefully I'll do it well. But in it, he proposes that every relationship that you have goes through a 3-part cycle that loops. And the 3 parts are a good thing, a rut, and a transition. So a good thing is the honeymoon phase. It's by nature fragile. It's when things are just so effortless and gliding along, and this is like the best thing that's ever happened, and you never want anything to change. Good things can't stay that way forever. They don't. They turn into ruts. Now, a rut isn't a bad thing, right? It's just comfortable. It's just familiar. The patterns are well worn. There's not a lot of novelty. Ruts are sticky. They want to keep you there. It's really hard to pull yourself out of a rut. Eventually, a rut gives way to a transition, and if you're lucky, back into a good thing. I think that this cycle of relationships applies not only to personal relationships, to friendships and romances. I think it applies to work. Even when you have a dream job like I did, after a while, you start to coast. The job becomes rote, the process systematized, the learning slows, and you find yourself wondering. For me, it was, if I'm spending all my time trying to save time and I've got no time left over for anything else, well, does that make any sense? My mom has lots of sayings that I've heard millions of times throughout my life. One of them, the thing that she says is, "A lady knows when it's time to leave the dance." Even when you're really scared that this dance might be the best fun you'll ever have. Leaving that job meant I went from having 20 publishing deadlines a day and this real-time chart of visits and page views that would tell me by the minute how well I was doing at my job that day. After I left, I had zero structure, no goals, no one to answer to, and I sat on my couch a lot, feeling really adrift. Like many people, I work best when my work is cut out for me. But that's the hard part, cutting out the work. That's the hard part. That's what's so difficult about transitions, especially away from perfectly good projects. It's the uncertainty. You have to drift for a while, and maybe you take some weird detours. Transitions are hard. But eventually, if you're looking and you're listening, the signposts point to your next good thing. And that's what my last story is about. My last story is about second acts. I'm still obsessed with time. Not so much losing time, and not so much wasting time, but making the time that I do spend meaningful. I'm focused especially right now on social networks, because that's where I spend a big chunk of my time. I think a lot of you probably do too. Lots of people have much bigger numbers than this, and this is just the amount of time I spent writing on networks, not reading them. I'll be honest with you though, I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted about how much time I and we all spend on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. On one hand, I think that Louis C.K. kind of has a point here. We've all volunteered ourselves for data entry jobs that these giant companies get to profit from. And why? Why? Is it boredom? Is it ego? Is it fear of missing out? At the same time, as much as I kind of get this, at the same time, I know how powerful participating on the network can be. These were two of the best moments of my entire life, and they were 100 times better because I got to celebrate them on the network. And this is just a tip. This is just a tip. I have met friends and collaborators and heroes and many of you. I've had my mind changed and I've become a clearer thinker. I've been heroicized and harassed and boosted back up again. And I know that you all have too. So, what have been your most meaningful moments on social networks? Was it election night, 2008? Was it when Steve Jobs died? Was it when your hero retweeted you? Was it Ferguson? The time we spend on social networks can be trivial or it can be meaningful. I want more of the latter. So how do we get there? I think the secret is in the data. Twitter and Facebook know that my social data is this treasure chest of desires and behaviors and hints about my identity that I don't even know that I'm sharing. But I should know, because it's my data, and these networks have a lot of it. That's why I started hacking on an app that mined my own Twitter data to get answers to some of these questions about how I was spending my time on these networks. To start, I had a bunch of questions. Who am I talking to? How often do I say kind words? How often do I get sucked into mindless BS? That weekend hacking project went through a bunch of iterations as an open source project. It's now available on the web to try now. It's called ThinkUp, thinkup.com. And it tries its best. It tries its best to get toward the answers to some of these questions. And I'd like to quickly show you some examples of how it does. Here's a ThinkUp insight that tells me how many times I thanked someone last month. I can also see if I said thank you more or less this month than I did the month before. This insight breaks down the gender identity of people who comment and like my stuff on Facebook. For me, it's mostly dudes. I'm not sure what that says about me or my work, but I'm rolling with it. It's definitely given me pause to think about it, though. This ThinkUp insight tells me if a friend has changed their profile and how. This is one of my favorites because it gives me this kind of like X-ray vision into how my friends are evolving their identity over time. This insight tells me how much I talk about myself. A lot. This is going to go up after today, that's for sure. And I can see how that rate changed week over week. Finally, this insight tells me how many times I drop the F-bomb online. And I'm really sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. These are facts that Twitter and Facebook won't ever reflect back to me. But this is the stuff that I want to know. And I hope you do too. And not because you're a social media douchebag, either, but because you're the opposite. As makers, part of our job is to build this little platform where all the people who love the stuff that we make can gather around and celebrate it. And I would bet collectively in this room, the average Twitter follower account is higher than 95% of Twitter's users. That gives us all this sort of outsized privilege and access and clout with a C that I hope to be as thoughtful about as I can be. ThinkUp aspires to help with that. So I don't know how this story ends, but I do kind of need your help finding out. How do you want to spend your time online? How can we make it more meaningful? Can we all help build a better web? I really want to know, so thank you so much for your time, and I hope you'll get in touch.